This is a Casio FX201P and it works. It's in program mode, in manual mode, digits come up, but if I go 450, 0 doesn't work. Now let's take the batteries out of that and pop it apart. So if you take this apart, you've got the back case, that's fine. Then you've got two PCBs. There's a keyboard PCB and a main processor PCB with the calculation electronics in it. Now they just fold apart, and you can see inside that these are both single-sided boards, and they've used a lot of link wires to make up the traces that they couldn't actually get on their single-sided board, instead of using a double-sided board. The boards are joined together with this sort of ribbon cable made out of copper wires, for want of a better word, and you can see here that that one's fallen off, and there's another one there that's fallen off, which is why the keyboard isn't working, and this happens quite a lot. I've got another one here. You can see that the keys, the contacts for the keys are actually bits of wire which run through the board on this side where there's no tracks, and these are actually sheets of copper that have been soldered on either side back onto the board. If you're really unlucky, you get this happening, which is battery leakage, because the batteries are sort of in this area and they fall down the leakage onto the keyboard and just eat the tracks away, which is what's happened here. So this is not really worth repairing. This I find to be a real pain, the ribbon cable, because as you bend it and you're taking it apart and so on, it eventually falls apart. So what I do is I put pin headers here and sockets on the other side, which means you can take the thing apart and put it back together again lots of times without this happening. And unfortunately this isn't really fixable because the tracks are really gone. There's lots of them and it would mean more wires, and it just looks quite untidy. So I've made a replacement board. This is same size, it's got the same layout, and hopefully all the components will fit. I haven't tried it yet. And all the bits of wire that are running through and the copper sheet, they're all done as a double-sided board with tracks on this side. So let's have a go at taking this out, putting pin headers in, and see if this board works. What I'm going to do is transfer the components. So the LEDs, that's fine, I can get LEDs. The rest of it, that's going to be pin header, these wires are going to go. The switches I'm going to take off this board and put on this board, hopefully. Might be a bit tricky, but we'll give it a go. I've populated one of the PCBs and put it into this sort of, well, it's actually a 201P, but the keyboard that I replaced, which had had a lot of battery damage, it was a FX202P. Keyboards are the same, exactly the same layout. Now if I turn it on, we can see the display comes up. I've got it in program mode because then you can see the keys. So I clear it, 0.123, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then if we run through the E0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and E, clear it, go back, you can see that works, and the clear key here clears keystrokes as it should. The start actually doesn't have a key code, but that does work as well, so if we put some stuff in, you can see we go through. And then if we go through here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, well, start, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here 6, 7. So it's working. I'll turn it off and pop the back off. This isn't screwed together. And have a look at the back of the board. There we go. Spin that round. So we've got the main processor PCB here. Now I've got pin headers, and I can just pull that off, which makes it a lot easier than the original sort of ribbon cable effort. And you can see I've got my board here. This is my keyboard, Unfortunately I made a few mistakes. When I assembled it I put the diodes the wrong way round and they didn't work, but it turns out the wiring for those was fine. But I did have, on the first 3 connections of this smaller connector here, those were wired up wrong in the schematic, so I've had to cut tracks and rewire those, but this is now fine. The keyboard is a lot neater than the original. Let's get an original from somewhere. Because the original was like this. That's a sort of fairly good one. Obviously I would have had no wires if I'd wired it up correctly, but it's a double-sided board, which means you don't need to have all the wires for the keyboard. You can do that with pads, and you don't need these link wires. And I've also taken away this horrible ribbon cable thing here. So I'm going to do a version 2. I've got the schematic already altered, and I've actually laid the board out as well, and I've rearranged it slightly. I've had to move some of these holes up a little bit in order to get the board to fit, and trim this edge here and this edge here. But I've changed that on the version 2 board, so hopefully that will fit better. Although this does fit in there, it's fine. It'll fit better, and also won't have these wires, so that'll be much neater. So I'm going to get some of those made up. Now I'm hoping I can get the switch out of here, because I've actually used smaller holes. I ought to put larger holes in version 2, thinking about it. So I'm hoping I can get the switch out, because that's the original switch from the calculator. I'm going to take this out a minute and we can have a look at the other side, because it's quite important how the switches work. So on the original, you can actually see it here. The original is a single-sided board with wires through, and the wires come through to make contact with the switches, and the switches are really just springs. Once I've got the board out, and it is quite a tight fit with the bank of 3 switches, so I'll probably have to lever it out with some tweezers or something here in order to get those switches to pop out like that. So if I take that out, now it's held at the bottom with some catches. It's also held at the top with a couple of catches, but one of them was broken on this keyboard and the other one's broken since. But it doesn't really matter, because the board is screwed in with 6 screws. So you can see here, these are the springs. So when you press down on a key, this spring comes up and makes contact with a piece of wire over here. And they're quite nice. They've got the springiness built into the contact, because they're sort of punched out, I suppose, and they actually have a nice feel to them. Now this is my keyboard, which is same layout as the original, but as it's a double-sided board I didn't need to put the wires on there. So what I've got are actually pads which are the same size roughly. They're quite a bit wider and the same length as the wires that went through, and what I've done is I've filled them with solder. Because the wires actually protrude quite a way above the surface of the board here, I've done the same here. I've tinned them, and I've got lumps of solder on each one of these pads, and that actually meant that the switch contacts got something to meet instead of having to travel all the way down to the PCB, which isn't what it did on the original. And I found that it works much better with these tinned pads. I've also found that you have to clean them, because if you leave any sort of flux on these pads, they don't work. You don't get a contact. So clean that with alcohol. And now it works fine, works like the original. You can't really tell that there's a different board in here. These pads here are the sort of keyboard rows, if you like. If the columns are coming off this connector, then the rows go out through there onto the other connector. The LEDs are fine, they're just taken off the original board, and the switches are taken off the original board. It does look like this switch is actually made for this calculator. It's not 3 separate switches. It's a custom made switch assembly, so if that's damaged there might be a bit of a problem. Obviously LEDs, you can just put an LED in there. Could change the colours or something. The main component that you can't really source is that key switch bank. But anyway, it's working, so we'll have a look at version 2 and see see if I can finally get one that just fits in as a replacement. I have got quite a lot of keyboards. That one's quite a nice one. That one hasn't been eaten, but for some reason this one doesn't work. It just makes any calculator you attach to it go bonkers, is the best way of describing it, coming up with displays that really shouldn't occur. This one I think's got a bit of damage over here, but I think this one might work. It's got actually no, this is the one that goes bonkers because I've got the key switch, sorry, the pin headers here, so that one's alright. This one, it's a nice front. This one I can't remember if it works. I think it does work. So maybe the good ones, I might leave those. If they work and they work reliably, I'll probably just leave them with the original keyboards. But anything like this, and all the tracks in this area on this one are just gone. They just aren't there, and it's eaten down into the board itself here as well. And this one didn't work. And there's a lot of rewiring and attempting to get it to actually work, and the problem is the battery corrosion's gone over the contacts as well for the switches. So that's the board that really made me decide to make a new PCB. And you can see over here there's some more leakage there which has gone onto these contacts. These contacts here are just you can have a look under there. Those contacts are just made by some little spring legs coming out of the metal sheet, just touching onto these pads. So if they don't make contact, you lose a complete row, or column actually. And there's loads of battery corrosion coming through on that all over the place. So yeah, I've got quite a few keyboards, and I'd say about half of them work. So any bad ones I'm going to replace with the version 2 of this, I think. But yeah, it works quite nicely, and I have effectively fixed this PCB now. I can replace that. Could throw it away. I don't know if I'm actually going to do that. Don't know if I can actually don't know if I can actually throw that away. Anyway, yeah. So wait for version 2.